I pretty much distilled human emotions into two categories. I think we either let it sit inside of us and it's still there, but we may not necessarily get it out of us. Or there are other people who they experience the emotion, whether it's good, sad, angry, whatever, and it automatically goes through them. So my grandpa, who's kind of notorious for having a temper, I don't know if it was related to being a war veteran or something, it may be, but there's this guy who I think cut him off on the freeway back in Hawaii or something like that. He was living in Hawaii. Guy cut him off, and he would have the craziest road rage. And it was so funny because he was such like a great, just an awesome grandfather to me, like very nice and kind, but like if he got crossed, especially on the road, I mean, he would just kind of lose it. So I guess this one time, this guy cut him off really bad or something, and then he followed him, and I guess he waited for him to leave his car, and they took a tire iron and just went to town and just like beat the crud out of the car. And so there were times where he had just like an explosive anger. It would just flow right through him, right? And so that's one way to deal with our emotions, is just get it out. And so that's kind of a more, expressive and explosive way of dealing with our emotions. The benefit is that we actually get it out of us. The downside is that there are consequences to that at times, right? And the other side is we have emotions that we feel, right? But they get stuck like plaque, like in our teeth. They just get stuck in there and they don't get out, but then they leak out. It's kind of like a crack in our car system, and it's going to seep out eventually and start to gunk stuff up. And I noticed that with me, I'm a little bit more of a not expressive kind of person when it comes to my excitement, my sadness, or my anger, or whatever emotion I'm feeling, and it just sort of sits in there. The only problem is if I don't end up processing it in a healthy way, it will leak out eventually. And I think obviously the ways in which we feel feelings is on a spectrum. There's some of us who are a little bit more stoic and we don't feel as deeply, and then some of us, like myself, are a bit more neurotic and we feel things very, very deeply, but may not necessarily process them in a mature way. So the question that we're going to pose today regarding emotions is: are emotions good? Are they bad? What is the way in which God's will is intended for us to process through our emotions? And if they're not at the place where they need to be, or the way we're processing through them, how does God want us to change or redirect them? Okay, so let's turn to Proverbs 29:11, and we're going to look at this verse here. And if you need help, just don't be shy. You can ask someone. Proverbs 29:11. Book of Proverbs is very helpful, and funny enough, there are 31 chapters of Proverbs, and you could read one chapter every day and double or triple, depending if it's on not a leap year or something in February. And I highly recommend it. And the book of Proverbs has saved me from myself in so many situations. And I highly recommend even considering it being a part of your daily Bible reading experience. Okay, so verse 11, so Proverbs 29, verse 11 says, "Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end." Your translation may say something a little bit different, but similar. A fool always loses his temper, but a wise man holds it back. So whatever your translation is, there is this idea that it is not helpful or even harmful to give full vent to whatever we're feeling, the full expression of it, the unfiltered full expression of it. I noticed this when I would need to process my feelings with someone else, and especially my wife. And my wife is my best friend and the closest person I am with on planet Earth. And if there's something I want to process with is going to be her. But I noticed when I would have really bad experiences that I didn't first, process on my own and or with God, I would just dump raw sewage onto my wife. That person did this, and I feel like this, and she'd be like, "Whoa, okay, she's a great listener and very empathetic." Can you? Yeah. Oh, thanks. My wife is a very good listener, very empathetic, but for any person, and I'm sure even a therapist who does this for a living, when someone's dumping their raw emotion on you, it can be pretty intense, right? To be on the receiving end of that. And so there is a way in which we can have those emotions be legitimate, because this verse doesn't say don't feel angry. It doesn't say that. You can actually feel as angry as you actually feel. But the question is, how do you react in light of that? So in other words, it's saying a foolish person really doesn't have much self-control. It's almost like, in fact, the emotions have more control over the person. So that's the question we have to ask ourselves is, do I control my emotions, or do my emotions control me? And if my emotions do control me, well, how do I even have more control? How do I not be, we talked about this before, but how can I be angry or be sad or whatever you are experiencing, but not actually become those things and in my actions start to harm other people because of that? So it says the wise person brings calm to an end, or the wise man holds it back. So it's kind of like this horse. You can rein it in, right? You may not be as powerful as the horse itself, but the question is, do you even have reins, or is there ability to rein it in, control it, redirect it, if you will? And also, we're going to turn to Ephesians chapter 4 in the New Testament, and we're going to read verse 26. So head over there. Ephesians chapter 4, 26. Okay. Ephesians 4, verse 26. Here we go. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. All right, I'm going to read it again. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. So what is this saying? It's saying that it's actually not sinful to be angry. I remember when I was in calculus class in my senior year, and I would have my Bible out because I would like to read the Bible sometimes at school, and my classmate next to me was asking me a question about anger. And he asked, well, isn't sin in anger, or is sin in anger? And I was like, well, yeah, it's sinful to be angry. And then my Christian friend behind me was like, well, on second thought, it actually isn't sinful to be angry. It's just what you do with that sin. And I think this verse is so accurate, or it very clearly says this tension, because you can actually feel the feeling, but the question is what you do with that feeling, right? So it's totally fine and good to feel whatever you feel. You feel angry, you feel sad, you feel a sense of hopelessness, or I don't know, whatever it is, or even good stuff. You're excited, you're expectant, whatever your feelings are. It's just in that, do not sin. And what it does also say is that if the door is open, like if there's a perpetual feeling of let's say anger in this case, well, if the anger has not been really processed or dealt with, then it could potentially open up the door to lies. Let's say I'm perpetually angry at someone that wronged me, and I'm seething inside, and let's say I haven't done anything to them to be vindictive, but I'm still just angry with them. Well, when I let that door open and I let the sun go down in my anger, and becomes another day, and a week, and years, and I'm still bitter at this person, it's going to let the door open to lies. It's going to let the door open to maybe lies about that person, or make me paranoid about what that person could also be doing, and it's not going to be good for me. It's going to slowly eat away at me. And so that's an important consideration too. Is well, how do I not let the sun go down? How do I process this appropriately? See, the thing is, our emotions are out of whack. God's intention for us when we experience emotions is to have them just like he has emotions, believe it or not. So take a look at Genesis 6, verse 6. This is in the beginning of the Bible. Genesis 6, verse 6. Okay. So this is after the world is falling apart, and it says that every intention of man's heart was evil. So you can just imagine a world in which everyone's constantly harming each other. But it says in Genesis 6, verse 6, the Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So God experiences emotion. God, by nature, is an emotional being. Sometimes I think in our culture, because it highly prioritizes rationality, we're very Greco-Roman, I think, in our approach to logic, and I think that's a part of we can very much tend to idolize certain people who have very, very high intellectual prowess and the way they articulate themselves and their eloquence. But just like rationality is in the nature of God, so is emotion. And so there doesn't have to be this competition between, logic and emotion. There can be a harmony between both, and we can see both as good and end of God. And it's interesting that God feels very deeply. And throughout the Bible, there are a lot of verses that talk about how God feels about stuff. He's excited. He's super thrilled. And he talks about King David being a man after his own heart, and God cherishes him. God is grieved at times when really tragic stuff happens. God is mourning. It is very much in God's nature to be an emotional being, right? And we are made in God's image. We are made like him. We have emotions. And for those of us who have pets, they also have emotions too, but the difference is that we have the human rationale. So some of us who have dogs, I would say when I get home, I think my dog may be more excited than my own kids at times. I don't know, he's always the first one there. And my kids are like, I don't know, oh, hey, Dad. Or, sometimes they're a little bit more excited. I think Corey lately has been pretty pumped to see me when I get home. But yeah, we know like our pets and animals can have emotions too. But there is something about the human being where we have both the human rationale and also the emotion. And God has that, and we are made in his image, right? And Jesus, it says that he is the image of God. So we are made in the likeness of God. So we are very different than other animals and creatures and bugs and stuff on this planet. But Jesus is the image of God. So when you see Jesus, you actually see who God is truly like, right? And in the Gospels, this is constantly demonstrated as Jesus is weeping at the grave of Lazarus. He sees the grave, and it says, and then he wept. And he wept. It's the shortest verse in the Bible where Jesus grieves. And he's over Jerusalem, he's looking at the city, and he's just crying over it because he just wants to grab them and huddle them together like a mother hen would gather its chicks. And he desperately wants to care for the people of the city who is going to go against him, right? And so Jesus is full of compassion as well. Whenever you see the phrase like, and Jesus had compassion on them, the Greek word is splagna, which sounds kind of gross because it is also kind of gross because it means guts or like intestines. So literally it's saying that Jesus was moved in his bowels towards people who were suffering. Yeah. and he had compassion on the crowds. So Jesus is very emotional. But what's interesting is that he also has self-control, right? I want you to take a look at John 2 and just take a look at how Jesus handles emotion. And we read this last year, but let's turn over to John 2, verse 13. Okay. John 2, verse 13. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at the tables and exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." All right, so Jesus is pretty emotional in this passage, right? Now, what's interesting about it, though, given that Jesus didn't sin and he's perfect, so if he's driving these people away and he's making a whip out of cords, how is he displaying perfect emotional maturity in this? Well, I think what's happening here is as he is making these cords, I mean, that doesn't, that's not a short process. That takes a little bit of time, right? So he's got to get this thing out and, tie up these cords and attach some sharp little things probably at the end or however he made the whip. And that takes a little bit of time, right? So I think we notice how Jesus doesn't immediately just start flipping stuff over. He's like, okay, I'm going to sit down. I'm going to make this whip methodically. And Jesus, you can tell Jesus is in control, right? He's not just acting impulsively, we'll say, out of emotion, right? So he's sitting, he's chilling, but he does also express his anger. He doesn't just let it sit and simmer and then he walks away from the temple like, oh, those people. See, why he's so angry is because these people have turned church into a business, and they're also occupying the area where the non-Jewish people are supposed to be. But they're like, the non-Jewish people, forget them. They don't need a relationship with God. We're just going to put a bunch of stuff there, and it's going to be really distracting with all these livestock and birds chirping and everything. And Jesus is really mad about that because he wants the Gentiles, the non-Jews, to also know God. And they've turned it into a corporate enterprise and not a place of prayer. So Jesus is super angry. Now, he doesn't just, like I said, he doesn't just bottle it up and walk away, but he actually does something about it. But the other thing is that he's also very in control because of what he could do. Knowing that Jesus is God, he could have just said, he could have Thanos snapped it and everyone would have died. And then he's like, yep, okay, well, I dealt with that issue. That could have been one way to, out of wrath, deal with how he really felt about the situation, right? But I think as he expresses his anger, it's also mercy because of what he could do to these people. So Jesus has a what we call a righteous anger. There's a legitimate anger that Jesus has towards this, and for good reason. But he's also very in control. He is completely in control about how he's feeling, right? Okay, and that's how I want to be too. I want to be like Jesus, and I want to be a feeler because sometimes people don't like to feel. Sometimes we don't like to feel like Eeyore. Have you ever seen Eeyore and Winnie the Pooh? And every time you watch that show or read, you just feel so bad for this guy over and over again. And he's also kind of in this cycle himself, right? He's just constantly in this grief state. And I don't want to feel sad. I don't ever want to feel angry. Actually, I don't ever want to feel sad. I only want to feel the happy stuff. And some people also feel that way. And the way they deal with that is they just say, well, if I just have certain substances that make me feel numb, I will never feel sad, which is true. But then you'll also not feel the other good stuff that God would want you to feel. And that's what's so interesting is like the perfect person. It talks about in Isaiah 53 also. It says that he was a man of sorrows. It says that Jesus as the Messiah was constantly and perpetually sad. But he wasn't the embodiment of sadness. He just constantly was sad over what he saw and experienced. And that is what it means to be a human. I think that's what it truly means to be human, is to feel these things. But as humans, we don't like to feel these things, and we don't like when these things have control over us. And the question is, well, how do we invite God to be human, to actually feel these things without suppressing them, but then make sure that as we're experiencing them, that we aren't harming other people or doing damage to ourselves? So how do we do that? All right, so take a look at, I know we're jumping around a little bit in the Bible, but turn to Psalm 53:6, and I want to show you at least what God's heart is for us as human beings. That's what it seems pretty clear is like what God's will would be for us with regards to our emotions. So Psalm 53, verse 6. Okay, so this is the end of the psalm. The Psalms were ancient songs and poetry, and they were used to sing praise and gratitude to God. And in verse 6 it says, "Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. When God restores his people, let Jacob rejoice and Israel be glad." God's heart is for us to be glad and rejoice and be joyful. God's not a party killer. Back in the day, God would actually mandate that his people have festivals and campouts. The festival of booths, or that celebration, was basically mandating his people go have a really fun camp out for a while. And God's really into joy. God made joy. God is joy. God is the embodiment of rejoicing. And yeah, God, I believe, really desires that for us. In Jonathan Edwards' book, there's this book he wrote called The Religious Affections. He says, "But it is doubtless true and evident from the scriptures that the essence of all true religion lies in holy love, and that in this divine affection and a habitual disposition to it, and that light which is the foundation of it, and those things which are the fruits of it, consists of the whole religion." So in other words, what Jonathan Edwards is saying is the truest faith or Christian faith, or what God's intention is that it would be full of love and divine affection. And I want that for my life too. And we know that when we have that, that really is very transformative. It makes us better people. It blesses other people when we operate out of that place of love. And that is the basis by which we love other people, is the love that God has shown us, because this is how God processes his emotion, if you will, okay? It says in 1 John 2:2 that he, Jesus, is the atoning sacrifice or propitiation for our sins, and not only for ours, but also for the sins of the whole world. So when God looks at you and me, now that we've trusted in Christ, he sees Jesus as the propitiation, which is a big word. It very simply means a wrath bearer. It means someone who took on the wrath of God. So let's say we're in a courtroom, we're guilty of crimes, right? The Bible says we've fallen short of the glory of God because we've lied, we've condemned and unfairly judged other people, we've mistreated people, gossiped about them, or been impure, whatever our list of things are, right? And there is a divine punishment for that. But then Jesus says, I'm going to take that wrath on the cross. I'm going to be the wrath bearer. That's what propitiation means. He's the atoning sacrifice. So he pays the price for us. So here's the thing, is like when God looks at us, he can be grieved, as a parent can be grieved over their child's behavior, but it doesn't affect their affection for them, or it doesn't affect their joy in them. And that's how God processes how we act as children. So that's how God can have a perfect, infinite, unfailing love in the same way that he loves his own son, that's how he can love us in the same exact way, because Jesus took on the wrath of God. And because Jesus did that, now God can look at us with affection and see us as children, right? Now, when we're processing our own emotions, the thing is, we don't process them the way God does. Because when, let's say someone wrongs us, man, our perception of that person is severely altered. Someone wrongs you severely, man, I'm going to see that person like the devil. And like, I might even talk bad about them. I might constantly ideate about ways I would hurt them. I don't know, whatever process that we try to do that is not healthy and is quite toxic. The way I believe God's heart to process these things, any emotion you have, is this way. In Isaiah 9:6, it describes the Messiah one day. Isaiah 7:9, these are chapters that are used to talk about Jesus as the Messiah and his birth as we celebrate during Christmas, even though it probably wasn't during Christmas time, probably September. But anyway, side note, Isaiah 9:6, it says, "For us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders." So referring to Jesus, it says, "He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Okay, he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. I've been through cognitive therapy before for about a year, and I found it really helpful. But the thing is, I only met with my counselor like once a week for an hour. And the counselor was very helpful, very great listener, helped me piece things together, helped me develop self-awareness and process whatever I was feeling and process my past and things like that. And I think having a human counselor is very helpful, but really like a glimpse into the robust depth of counseling that we can have from Jesus himself. Because when you have a therapist, well, they have to be compensated for their time hourly, right? And sometimes, depending on who the therapist is, that can be quite expensive, and you only get to meet with them for 1 hour. Now, what if God told you, hey, every time you pray to me, it's going to cost like $150. You can only talk to me for an hour a week, right? You may still do it, but that'd be kind of a weird prayer life, right? Hey, God, I'm going to clock in, hey, got an hour with you, and that'd be kind of weird, right? What this is saying is that God is the wonderful counselor. So he's not just a good counselor like a therapist you might have. He is like the best counselor who's open 24/7 and is free. So what if there was a therapist around here, right? And you had unlimited access to them, and they were the best therapist on planet Earth. Like, they were world renowned. They had like a couple, they weren't just a doctor, they were like doctor. Like maybe they had 5 doctors in front of their name. They're the best therapists, and you could go to them anytime you wanted. You could walk in their office, and they were always there. They slept in their office. So hey, you knock on the door at 2:30 a.m. Hey, I can't sleep. I'm having a nightmare, and hey, come on in. Let's talk. That would be the greatest therapist on earth, right? I mean, it's just not human. There's no therapist like that, right? This is saying that Jesus is going to be that therapist for us. So I don't know if you like coffee as much as Gordy, maybe not, but usually when you're drinking coffee, every time you're drinking coffee, you need coffee grounds, right? I don't know how you make coffee without any form of coffee grounds, because that's where coffee comes from. But anyway, you need a way to filter that, right? I don't know if you've ever drank coffee where it wasn't filtered all that good and you're just like munching on the grounds. Do you like grounds? Maybe you do. Okay. I personally don't like coffee grounds in my teeth, and they get stuck, and I don't like it. And so there has to be a way to filter this stuff out, right? So in other words, it's not healthy for us to keep these emotions inside. And actually, it may not even be good for us to keep excitement and good things inside. Let me give you an example. I believe that our joy is completed once we say something about it. So let's say you go to a great restaurant, you see an amazing movie. What do you have to do? Tell someone about it. Man, I had the best sushi at such and such a place. Or did you see Dune 2 or whatever movie you saw, you have to go see this or experience this or whatever. It just comes naturally to us because that's how we're wired. Our joy is completed upon saying something about it, right? And so whatever that is, well, I strongly believe that what this verse is also saying, in that him being a wonderful counselor, did I say peach? It almost sounded like peach. Prince of Peace, that Jesus is like the filter for our emotions. He's like the filter we've always needed, right? Because let me ask you a question: is like when we don't have Christ, like how else are we going to deal with our emotions? Because sometimes we have to filter it through a spouse or someone, but they aren't able to truly fully see and understand our experience. They can piece things together based on what they notice and what they hear us saying. But what if you have a perfect parent who actually not only just sees perfectly how you're experiencing, but feels how you feel, right? Because there's nothing more healing than having someone on the receiving end of talking about something, and they're like, I know how that feels. And they have a story that goes with that, right? And it says that Jesus was a man of sorrows, and he was tempted in every way like us without becoming sinful. And so what that means is that Jesus understands you. Jesus actually knows what it's like to be betrayed by Judas. He knows what it looks like to be rejected by his family when they thought he was crazy. He knows what it's like to be almost murdered, because he was threatened by multiple people at times to be thrown off a cliff or stoned, or he actually was murdered. Jesus really does get us, right? And so because he gets us, he also makes us the best therapists, because it's also very disheartening sometimes when you tell someone your experience and they say, oh yeah, I know exactly how you feel. That's like when, I'll give you an example. So let's say, this is going to sound, I guess, kind of, might sound kind of off at first, but let's say someone lost their child, something as grievous as that, right? They lost their child. And then you tell someone, and they're like, oh my gosh, I know exactly how that feels. I lost my hamster last year, and it was so bad. And you'd be like, you do not understand. Like, how can you possibly make that comparison, right? But it's so encouraging when we have Jesus as a Savior, and you can talk to him and tell him exactly how you're feeling, and he's like, I know exactly how that feels. He makes it like there's no one safer to talk to when someone's not going to judge you for how you feel, and you can just tell them anything, and there's just an immediate sense of peace and compassion and understanding with what we're going through. And I really like this verse. I actually liked it so much. Back in the day when I was younger, like some of us in my early 20s, I actually had dyed my hair, and then I had 1 Peter 5:7 written on the side of my head. Yeah, back in the day. And I love this verse, which is, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. I love that verse because, like, it doesn't matter how you feel, and sometimes we don't want to share how we feel because we maybe feel ashamed about that. Because sometimes, so in Orange County, one of the interesting things is that 90% of students who are being cyberbullied, they never tell their parents. And the reason why is because I think maybe they'll get in trouble or something like that. And it's really sad because so many people don't actually communicate because maybe there's going to be a sense of shame, or they're going to feel like they're going to get in trouble. But it's so cool how we can actually tell God anything about anything that we're feeling, and God's not going to get us in trouble, or he's not going to punish us. And as a parent too, we have such like an unfailing, undying love and affection for our children. There's nothing that they can do or say that would minimize our affection for them, right? And so that's the encouragement for us, is that we have a God who we can confide in. I'm going to read this last part, and there's this. I'm going to leave you with this story. There's this story of this woman called Corrie ten Boom. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, but she and her family was in the Nazi concentration camp during World War II. And after her sister was killed, later on, she actually had an encounter with the Nazi officer who killed her family. And so she describes this moment. I think there was some event. It was at a church building, and so he actually talks to her, and he says, "Will you forgive me?" Because he recognized that he was the person who killed her sister. And so Corrie ten Boom, in her I think autobiography, she's writing about this incident, and she just questions, like, how could he, just in asking this question, just erase her death, right? Because so what? So this Nazi officer, he asked for forgiveness, and that's supposed to be it? Like, how does she process that? So I'm going to read some of this, but it says, "It could not have been many seconds that he stood there, hand held out, but to me it seemed hours as I wrestled with the most difficult thing I had ever had to do. For I had to do it. I knew that the message that God forgives has a prior condition, that we forgive those who have injured us. If you do not forgive men their trespasses, Jesus says, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. I knew it only as a commandment of God, not only as a commandment of God, but as a daily practice. Since the end of the war, I had a home in Holland for victims of Nazi brutality. Those who were able to forgive their former enemies were able also to return to the outside world and rebuild their lives, no matter what the physical scars. Those who nursed their bitterness remained invalids. It was as simple and as horrible as that. And still, I stood there with the coldness clutching my heart. But forgiveness is not an emotion. I knew that too. Forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. Jesus, help me. I prayed silently. I can lift my hand. I can do that much. You supply the feeling. And so woodenly, mechanically, I thrust my hand into the one stretched out to me. And as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, sprang into my joined hands, and then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being, bringing tears to my eyes. I forgive you, brother, I cried with all my heart. For a long moment, we grasped each other's hands, the former guard and the former prisoner. I had never known God's love so intensely as I did then. And having thus learned to forgive in this hardest of situations, I never again had difficulty in forgiving. I wish I could say it. I wish I could say that merciful and charitable thoughts just naturally flowed from me from then on, but they didn't. If there's one thing I learned at 80 years of age, it's that I can't store up good feelings and behavior, but only draw them fresh from God each day. Maybe I'm glad it's that way, for every time I go to him, he teaches me something else. I recall the time, some 15 years ago, when some Christian friends whom I had loved and trusted did something which hurt me. You would have thought, having forgiven the Nazi guard, this would have been child's play. It wasn't. For weeks, I seethed inside. But at last, I asked God again to work his miracle in me, and again it happened. First the cold-blooded decision, then the flood of joy and peace. And that's how God helps us filter even the darkest and grievous of things. And that's what we're looking for. And without him, we have the burden of processing these things on our own. And at best, an imperfect person to process with. But what's so amazing about her story is that she didn't want to forgive him. Her feelings were full of anger and sadness and bitterness, and understandably so, right? But so interestingly, this Nazi guard becomes a Christian, and he's asking to be forgiven. And because of what Jesus did for Corrie ten Boom, the forgiveness that Jesus gave her, it gave her the power to extend her hand, even when she didn't feel like doing it. And that's the power of the gospel that changes us. It does something in us that we couldn't naturally do in this place, in this situation, to forgive a Nazi officer who murdered your sister, right? And so I just leave you with that and encourage you that God is waiting for you, that he is wanting to hear from you, and he longs to hear your voice because he made your voice. And just like you long to hear the voice of your kids, like I long to hear the voice of my children in the morning, God longs to hear your voice